Good evening. I hope that, Christine, you've had a good day, and I appreciate you saving some time for us tonight. So, Christine, you joined us last week at the conference and did a wonderful job of talking about what's going on in Wake County. And we realized pretty quickly that there was a lot of information we wanted to share, and we really appreciate you coming back tonight and allowing us to kind of have a more in-depth conversation with our friends who are joining us tonight. And for everyone who is listening tonight, I wanted to remind you a little bit about Christine. She is a professional policy analyst and a freelance writer. She's lived in Wake County since 1989. She is a product of North Carolina schools. She graduated from UNC and has a master's degree in public affairs from Princeton University. Her work as a policy analyst, a consultant, and journalist has focused on the fields of public health access, and whoops, I went too fast there, friends, and public education. Christine has been active in lots of PTAs. I met Christine a little over a decade ago when she was quite active in her PTA and her BAC. And shortly after that, she ran for school board and was elected in 2011. And she has served 2 terms as chair and 2 as vice chair, and is serving currently on several school board committees. She's a member of the Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church and is a William Friday Fellow for Human Relations through the Wild Acres Leadership Initiative. So, Christine, after all that, I'm impressed and I'm proud you're here. So, Christine, I wanted to take a minute with our audience and kind of talk a little bit about what is school privatization, because lots of folks have been tuning in at our conference and some of our webinars and talking a little bit about what are we talking about. And really, we're talking about that shift of public education funds from the public school system to the private sector. And this is done in many ways. This has been going on for quite some time in North Carolina. And this is kind of an overview to help start our conversation tonight. We look at some of the things that have been going on in North Carolina since 2008, 2009 until a decade later. And some of these activities have a lot to do with school privatization. And Christine joined me in looking at this and talking about some of these impacts. And what do you see that stands out to you in terms of how our school system has moved from focusing primarily on public interest to a private sector?
Well, I think this is a very, well, first, thank you for having me this evening. And I thought the conference was really informative, and I appreciate the opportunity to continue this conversation, because as you see, there's a lot we could talk about. And this chart does summarize just in the last 10 years how our public school system has been under attack and under funded for the last 10 years in North Carolina. We used to, as you well remember, 20 years ago, we were a destination for teachers. We were a destination for educators who wanted to be part of strong public school systems. And North Carolina, in the last 10 years, first in the first 10 years of this century, we had great work. We were growing. We were attracting a lot of families and businesses from out of state to come to North Carolina, in large part because we had strong public schools. And then after the recession hit, we have not been able to recover. We've had 10 years of underfunding. We've had expansions in privatization, as you see with vouchers and charter schools. And there's been really an attack on public schools as unfairly as not being successful. Whereas I think by the end of this hour, I want folks to recognize that our public schools are doing great innovative work, and they deserve our support.
And you know, Christine, when we talk about privatization, some of the tools that are used to accomplish that are certainly charters. I think folks are pretty clearly understand the impact charters have had on our public schools in Wake County at this point. Vouchers, which are giving money directly to private schools for public school students. We've implemented the A through F school performance letter grades, which has been a way to to label and characterize schools as in terms of not passing, not failing, failing our kids. And this has been a very controversial thing, which we can talk about a little bit if you'd like. And then the whole state takeover of schools, education savings accounts, municipal funded charter schools. All of these have been strategies that have been implemented since 2008 to literally pull students and funds out of the public school system, which is already underfunded, into the private sector. This is kind of a really
highlighting back to that. And the other thing that's included on that chart is a lot of these, like the A through F, as well as the virtual charter schools and the state takeover, the innovative school district, that's the state takeover of schools. They've come from out of state. They've been initiatives that have been tried in other states and have failed in other states. And in Florida, for example, the A through F, that's where we first started putting these sanitation grades, the A through F letter grades on schools. They have altered their system, and they've added a lot more nuance and detail to the performance grades of their schools. But here in North Carolina, we've not. We've stuck with a very limited and unfair way of putting grades on schools. The same with the state takeover of schools. The innovative school district has been failed process in other states, and we have stuck by it for some reason, and our legislature has not it's not a successful program. So what's sad to me is that some of these policy initiatives have proven to be problematic and wasting taxpayer dollars in other states, and yet we're still trying them here in North Carolina. Education savings accounts is a great example of something that's been the source of many scandals in other states. But so I hope that we, in the next 10 years, rectify some of these policies.
So Christine, one thing, since you brought us back to this chart, thank you. I think that's really important to talk about these letter grades, because we also know that 80% of this calculation is based on test scores, with only 20% showing giving any credit to a student or a school for making any progress in a student's academic achievement. So that's a really out of whack, so to speak, grade against the school system. And the other thing that I want you to, I'd like to talk about for a second, then we'll move back to charters, is when you look at this top of this chart, what does it make you think about in terms of the teacher pipeline? Because that's one of the ways that privatization has been successful over the years, is not just moving towards charters and vouchers and educational savings accounts and ways to, highlight or shame schools or pull schools out of the state system and take them over, but also it involves disrupting the teacher pipeline. So maybe you're on the school board, you deal with this every single year when you're looking to fill your vacancies and hire teachers and keep the ones you have. Talk about that a little bit with us.
Well, it certainly does show on this chart, because I think the Teaching Fellows program was a very successful program, as you see, that was eliminated, and now they've brought it back, but at only a very fraction of what it once was. Our teacher pay was flat for several years, and we struggled in Wake County and other districts because teachers were not seeing any increases in their pay for 4 or 5 years earlier this decade. And I think the biggest hit is a lack of treating educators as professionals and paying them professional salary. In particular, I think the retirement benefits and the retirement health benefits, and eliminating those health benefits, as you see after 2021, new teachers will not, educators will not get those health benefits that they've counted on. And from the state level, they also push down the cost of retirement benefits onto our school systems. And that's a huge risk to our local school systems that we don't talk about enough, because I think it's very threatening to the future of public education in North Carolina.
Well, Christine, you made me think of a very good point about the benefits, and that is that for decades, I guess we've always kind of had an arrangement, an agreement, if you would, with teachers and state employees that, that we didn't pay the most competitive salaries in terms of what was going on in the marketplace for other uses of your college degree, but there was always a solid, good retirement program. There was a way that
it's like amortizing those wages over a longer period of time, because we couldn't pay private sector competitive wages. We had a more generous over the course of a lifetime benefits at the end, the retirement benefits. So I think by taking that away, you make our salaries in public sector even less competitive. And that is part of the privatization strategy, I think. And I think, but it's economically doesn't make sense. And it's not good for taxpayers, and it's not a sound investment for taxpayers to have a robust public sector that serves those public needs.
Okay, so I'm gonna move forward. Yeah, I'm gonna move forward. I was a little happy on the trigger there, but I'm gonna move forward from this. But this is really the essence. I encourage people to really think about, the fact that there is no every group that we've worked with, Christine, whether it's parents, PTAs, education advocates, scholars in our universities, business community, chambers of commerce, all of these groups who are involved in preparing the labor force, preparing students for future jobs and so forth, have recognized the importance of having a good teaching teaching force in our schools. And so I hope that we can see more interest in the public at large and in the business community in being concerned about what's happening to our teacher pipeline. But shifting back over to look a little bit at what's going on with charters, Christine, this shows pretty clearly what happened when the cap was taken off of charter schools in 2011, 2013, and you see that a quick rise in the number of charters in the state as a whole, now over around 200, I think, if I'm correct. And we see that the cumulative number of students over that period of time have reached now close to 1 million. But this, to me, is a really powerful look at what's going on with cumulative state funding that we have spent so far. And you can see that we're now in the billions of dollars that have been taken out of our public school system into a charter school system throughout the state. And I guess I want you to comment on this chart, because this is the consequence of all these kids who've been pulled into a separate system that's not accountable, doesn't have the same operating requirements, and this is what's happened in terms of the annual expected growth. Talk to me about this a little bit.
Well, I think the earlier slides where you showed there was some stable, when we had the cap, and as you know, in the 90s, the charter schools in North Carolina started with the purpose of being innovative, with the purpose of having less, restrictions under state statute, so that they could try something different, do different innovative things. And I think what has happened since the cap came off is that there's been no sense of having innovation as a priority with charter schools. Some of the earlier charter schools have continued to be serve that purpose, but increasingly, since the cap came off, as you see, we're not getting better performance. We are not getting charter schools that are doing innovative curriculum. In fact, I would argue that in the more recent charters are doing the opposite. They're doing more traditional curriculum as almost a backlash to innovation. And so I have great concerns that taxpayers are being asked to fund these schools, 20% of which now are for-profit schools. And taxpayer dollars are going to shareholders in a for-profit structure. And they're not getting better education for students. And that's a great concern to me as a school board member, but also as a taxpayer.
Yeah, I think you know.
I think we need it more clearly at the conference. So.
Well, I think this chart came from NC Policy Watch on a study that Chris Nordstrom did looking at, so how are we spending this money? Is it really making a difference? Are we really seeing better performance coming out of our charter schools than our traditional schools? And even though we know that the measure is kind of focused just on test scores, still, even though those limitations, we see that traditional schools are doing quite well. And Christine, remember the original legislation in terms of charter schools. Let's share that with our audience for just a minute. It was to be very limited. It was to be an innovative opportunity to experiment with new teaching styles, with different curriculum. Can you talk about that a little bit? And when it started in Wake County, how did it work?
Right. I mean, that was the stated purpose. But I also know that from the very start, very few charter schools were diverse. They did, I think, in many parts of the state, become vehicles for resegregation. And I think that has been the case throughout the structure of North Carolina charter schools. And I think it's something that we need to point out, whether intentional or not. The choices that parents are making are resegregating our schools, and that's spelled out in the data from the various charter schools in the state. And I think another point worth noting that I didn't make at the conference, so I'm glad for this second chance, is that of the 14 new charter schools that opened this year, 11 of those 14 are below 75% of their projected enrollment. So 11 of the 14 are below 75% of their enrollment, and 8 of those 11 are below their break-even number of students enrolled for their projected budget. So to me, these 8 of these 14 schools are very risky at being financially unstable for the students who are there, as well as for the taxpayers who are putting money into these schools. And of those 8, there are 3 schools that are below the state minimum. If they're going to stay open this year, they have to get a waiver to stay open. So these schools, we might have reached a saturation point with charters. And I think we have to be very cautious as a state, and I think is in spending public money on schools that are not able to be financially stable. And I think that's a great concern that both students and taxpayers should have.
And you know, Christine, one of the things about charter schools is that they don't have the same restrictions. They don't have to have all of their staff, instructional staff, certified. They do not have to keep to the same calendar that's mandated for all the school systems in the state by the General Assembly, and they're not as accountable in several other modes of instruction. And how do you think that's really impacting the lives of these children who are in these classrooms, especially when the school is closed down?
Yeah, and I think when you had Carol Sawyer last Saturday, that was a great follow-up conversation as well. I think she did a great job explaining how the economics of charter schools are not as efficient as a public school system. You know, similar to Charlotte-Mecklenburg, when we open a school, we're very deliberate in where we locate the school in Wake County, where the growth is for students. Students are enrolled in a compact way of assigning students to schools, and charter schools will take students from all over. They typically don't offer transportation, so some students can't even choose the school if they rely on transportation in order to get to school every day. So there's just a lot of inequalities, both in the setup of charter schools and in the economic reality of charter schools that creates a lot of inefficiencies.
Well, I'm going to show this chart now, and I want to look a little bit at what's going on in Wake County, because you talked about this a little bit at the conference. So we have how many charters in Wake County now? 24.
24.
Or by next year, there'll be 30. So how has that impacted your market share in Wake County, Christine?
Well, we have seen a decline in our market share. Charter schools, when there was a cap, had a fairly stable enrollment in Wake County, and with increased funding from our county commissioners, they've become more profitable in Wake County. So it's attracted some for-profits here, which we never had before. But it is impacting our market share, and not in an efficient way. The charters are having trouble finding sites, as an example, in western Wake County, which is a very fast-growing part of our county. So they're locating in eastern Wake County, in places where land is less expensive, but where we have capacity. So they're not part of our planning process. They are impacting schools in ways that are also resegregating our schools. So it's made it very difficult for us as a system to be efficient in how we plan and efficient in how we assign and enroll students in our schools.
And here's another interesting chart from Wake County. Can you explain what's going on here?
This is a chart that our chair, Jim Martin, has come up with, and it does show an impact that of the amount of funds that come out of our budget for charter schools. It's almost, and he states it like a tax. So I don't, I've just always referenced the cumulative effect, that cumulatively our charter schools get a set percentage of our local appropriation from our county commissioners. And this year that's totaling $45 million approximately. And that's a significant, and we pay that out, as you note, to 70 different charters, many outside Wake County. One of those new charters that's set to open in 2020 is right across the Wake County line in Chatham County. But the board is made up of folks from Wake County. And so they were able to find a site right across the border. But it's going to impact us, even though it's not in Wake. But we also have payments to a charter school in Wilson and a charter school in Alamance County. So it is increasing the lack of coordination is significant.
So Christine, so do I understand you correctly? So when you go to the county commissioners and you advocate for the school budget you need for your Wake County students that you have responsibility for, and you bring in the advocates to advocate for the public school system, the PTAs, the business community, and when we are successfully convinced the county commissioners to add to the supplement for teachers, or to add extra money for counselors, or to add extra money for programs that impact special needs children, some of those funds automatically go to charters?
Yes, they are. It's
even if they don't offer the services?
Correct. So charter schools, for example, get a portion of our OTC and our career and technical education, even though most of them are elementary or middle school and do not even offer career or technical education. They get a part of our parking fees. They get our child nutrition as well as transportation funds, regardless of whether they offer nutrition or transportation funds. So it's a share that is linked to services that we offer, but that they may not necessarily offer. And we have anecdotal evidence of charter schools that counsel students that have specific or expensive needs back to the public school. I've reviewed parent requests where they want to come back to our schools and have a specific assignment, and they say that we had to come back to the public school to get the services that my son needs that wasn't at the private or the charter school. So public schools serve all children regardless of need, and that's why I love public schools, because they are inclusive, and I think that's why they're excellent investments for our community, because they're educating our kids.
So when these kids leave the school system, go to the charter school, and then they come back, how does that impact your funding?
Um,
Who keeps the money?
Well, I thought Carol did also a great job reiterating that point, that the state funding is dispersed once or twice a year, and those charter schools do keep that money if they have that child enrolled. But if that student comes after the 20th day of either semester, that state funding does not come back to our public schools. We have to wait till the next year if that student stays enrolled with us to get state funding for that student. The local allotments are given on a monthly basis. So we stay in touch with the charters, and they self-report the number of students that they have to us. And we have ways of, the staff tells me we have ways of verifying that.
But so if the money goes to the charter, at some point the kid comes back to the school system, that money does not come back with them from the local funds.
After a certain point.
Okay. That is very interesting. So I'm going to shift gears with you a little bit and talk a small bit about vouchers. Vouchers is another thing that's going on in North Carolina that started and was authorized in 2013. The program started in 2014-15 with a small number of kids, and this is the projected cost for the allocations that's been given by the North Carolina General Assembly through the year 2027 school year. Again, this is astounding to me that we are taking these kind of public dollars and putting them.
And this is not linked to demand. It was an automatic step that a former senator put into the budget. And what's alarming to me is that they've not met their demand. There's excess money that's going unspent in this voucher program, and instead of reallocating that money to public schools or other needs that the state has, they're not reallocating it, and they're looking for ways to spend it, which I think is very inefficient to the taxpayer. Instead of reallocating money that's not in demand for these vouchers, and I think for good reason, they're not reallocating it, and I think that's not a responsible way to handle public dollars.
Well, you know, Christine, this is a chart that we shared last week, and a lot of people had comments on it. They were kind of astounded to find out that public dollars are not only going to private schools with absolutely no strings attached, but that the schools that it's going to are primarily schools that have religious doctrine being taught at the school. What do you see here that really kind of concerns you coming from a public school setting?
Well, I'm very concerned about the curriculum that are taught at many of these religious schools, and I think once taxpayers would look more closely at them, they would likely share concerns. I think it's another concern I've had of the voucher system is a very much a lack of accountability. There's a school in Fayetteville that, as an example, had an embezzlement case of a family member of the leader of the school embezzled tens of thousands of dollars and was convicted and was serving their sentence on the weekends and still teaching at the school during the week. And that's not holding folks accountable for mishandling public funds. So I think there needs to be much more oversight of this program, and I think it should be scaled back.
So in the middle of, you know, a recession in 2008 and then the recovery that's taken almost a decade, we see that our school systems are still underfunded. We're still 39th in per pupil spending. We're still struggling to meet the needs of all kids in our school system. And we see the money that's being pulled out for unaccountable charters, and many that don't particularly succeed after a number of years. And then we look at this chart and see the number of vouchers and the money being allocated for this program, and it really does concern many education advocates in terms of this is going on while our public school system is being, starved. And I did, there's a few facts here about the vouchers for last school year. There were 90,651 students who participated, and 452 different private schools who accepted that money. Wake County had 677 students. Christine, one of the things I also would like you to comment on is how the eligibility for this program has shifted since the beginning to now.
Well, and I think that's a good point, because initially this was proposed as a way of having lower income families have access to non-public schools. So I think because there was not the demand, they're looking to actually expand the eligibility, but it is expanded beyond what they initially said the program should be for. And Wake County, we typically are about 10% of the state. So 677, intrigued by that number, is actually lower than what our typical participation would be. So it seems to me those must be more in rural or other schools. Although I've heard Guilford County and Cumberland County seem to have higher participation rates.
They have the highest in the state, and Wake County comes in there in the top 5 or top. And Forsyth County is right behind, and of course the urban counties are pulling in most of the voucher students.
But I think it's also concerning to me that there's a lot of discrimination in these schools against students, but also against educators and faculty. That a lot of these schools do not hire in a way that that is non-discriminatory. So as a taxpayer, it's concerning to me that we're funding schools that discriminate against both students and employees.
And this figure to me, that currently 44% of families with children would be income eligible, is a startling number. That we see two things that this represents to me. One is a shift in making more and more folks eligible by lowering the requirements for the eligibility, but also what that says right now about the state of low-income families in our state, which has increased significantly over the last decade. Christine, while we've talked a lot about this, the thing that seems to be sticking in everyone's mind is that these programs have been pushed as being an opportunity for choice, for parents to have choice about schools. And what we see in terms of the vouchers is that that's not quite true. What we're seeing happening there is that the choice is religious schools, and well, that certainly is a choice. But in the charter schools, we haven't seen as much innovation or variety in programs and success for students as touted. But talk a little bit about, at the same time, what is actually going on in Wake County?
Well, I think, and I'm glad this is my favorite slide, because it talks about the excellent public education that's going on in Wake County. And the actual, to me, I think the innovation in public education in Wake County is happening in our public school system. We have worked hard and focused on having a high graduation rate without lowering our standards. We've actually increased standards as well as increased our graduation rate. And for 5-6 years running, the rate of improvement in graduation rate has been our African American and our Latino students. So they are actually having a faster rate of improvement for graduation in Wake County. We've got at least 2/3 of our high schools that now exceed 90%. And some of our schools had a graduation rate of 100%. So we are doing great and competing favorably with charter and private schools as far as our success. We have the best teachers in the county. More than 97% of our teachers met or exceeded academic growth standards in our state the last 2 years. And we have the highest number of national board certified teachers. And we've done in the nation and here in Wake County, and that's for the last 14, 15 years. So we have exceptional teachers who are working hard And the National Board Certification, as you all know, is the gold standard of professional development for teachers. Nationally, it was developed by our former Governor Jim Hunt, truly as a professional credential for excellent teachers. And that's something we're exceptionally proud of here in Wake County. Most of our schools are diverse and thriving. They are doing well, and they have diverse groups of students who are learning from each other how to get along and be part of a community. We've got issues that every school system has with bullying and other conflict with students, but we also have the means to solve those conflicts and teach our students how to interact and get along and collaborate with each other. And I was struck on that Saturday I think a great point was raised that employers fire their workers you're more likely to get fired for a collegial problem or for not getting along with people than you are for job performance. So we truly are preparing students for the real world, and we're expanded our career and credentialing opportunities. I heard Carol say that Charlotte Mecklenburg, they are also doing this parallel work to really expand the opportunities students have for work-based education, work-based experiences, and credentialing within courses at their school. So we work really closely with Wake Tech to give them some community college credentials and experiences, as well as we have early college opportunities with local universities, NC State and St. Augustine, so it's as well as Wake Tech. So we're doing some great innovative work here in Wake County. Our magnet systems have a diverse offerings, and 36 of 51, as you see, of our magnet schools here in Wake County are schools of excellence or distinction. And that the magnet system is a way of providing choice for parents in a way that has purpose and a structure that is providing diverse environments for our students.
Well, tell us a little bit about your trade magnet schools, and particularly Vernon Malone School.
Right. Yes, we've got these partnerships with Wake Tech Community College, both North Wake Career Academy is our newest one, as well as Vernon Malone College and Career Academy. And we've had a long-standing relationship with them in the health sciences with the Wake Early College for Health Sciences. That's a collaboration with Wake Tech and Wake Med, where students are getting hands-on health sciences and health career-related training. So we've got these three schools are all very diverse schools. They represent all of Wake County, and they have near 100%, if not 100% graduation rates. Students can go for 4 or 5 years and come out with a high school diploma as well as a 2-year associate's degree from Wake Tech. They've been very highly successful and exciting ways of preparing our students, not just for getting them a great education and a high school diploma, but preparing them for a career. And it's been very well received by our business community here in Wake County.
Well, you know, one of the things that always amazes me about this conversation about privatizing our public schools and pulling out the schools into charters and vouchers is that what we know about private schools and charter schools nationally, as well as in North Carolina, is that they predominantly are segregated. They're segregated by race and income, and sometimes both. And so in Wake County, how are you working? This is your biggest, your program offerings, your choice within the public school system is helping that. Tell us about any other things that you're working on to try to keep your school diverse and to try to keep your school as the #1 choice for parents.
Well, our early colleges is one example. Is very intentionally, they're all application schools, and we're very intentional on how we accept those applications. At least half of the students are first-time college goers from their families. Our magnet schools had weighted selection criteria to keep them diverse. We've expanded the number of magnet schools around the rim so that to make them more accessible to other parts of the county. So having them centrally located, but also within reach of Wake Forest, Apex, and other municipalities that we have on the outskirts of Wake County. And very intentional about how we provide that choice. About 10% of the seats are pure lottery, so they are unweighted. So we set aside some seats, so you always have one chance of getting into our magnet.
Okay.
But the rest of the seats are intentionally filled with students who help that school stay dynamic and diverse. And I think we also make a huge effort to listen to the 70% of our population who do not have school-age children. I think we work hard to connect with our business community, with employers, with grandparents, but also with folks who do not have children in the schools, but want to make sure that their police officers and their firefighters and their nurses and their the future workforce in the county is well educated and ready to be collaborative, communicative, and creative when they get out of high school. We're trying really hard not to be driven by standardized testing, but more by what we call these 4 C's: creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. These are what we hear our employers need from our graduates. And so we're trying to prepare them for career in college and that next step in the world. And I think that comes from being in a diverse and vibrant public education system.
Christine, right now, if you're looking at the next couple of years in Wake County, what do you see as some of the most exciting new program, new policy, new idea that the school board has? Tell us about something that we don't know a lot about yet that you're excited about.
Well, I'm very excited about the work we're doing with RTI to try to strengthen all of our schools, to make sure that we are having strong, rigorous curriculum that's responsive to student needs in all of our schools, and making sure that our schools aren't either highly concentrated poverty populations or highly concentrated affluent populations. And that's going to be hard based on our housing patterns, but it's exciting work, and we're making sure that we're going to be the first and best choice for all families, and also continue to have the support of our community. And I think that's a strong balance that we owe the taxpayers of our community, and we owe the future of our community to make sure that we are building that foundation across our school system.
And let's take a breather here and give our audience an opportunity to have a few questions, and answer some things that they would like to ask. Here's a question for you. What do you think are the 3 top funding challenges for Wake County Public Schools?
That's a great question. And I saw you ask Carol, so I tried to come up with an answer ahead of time. I think one significant strain is that 10 years later, after the Great Recession, we are still at the same or lower per pupil spending for our schools. Students' needs have gotten more complex. Demands from the community have gotten more complex, and yet we have not really increased our per pupil funding in the last 10 years when you control for inflation. The cost of materials has gone up. We don't have new textbooks. We're relying on digital materials, and that's become very complicated. And I think that's a significant strain on our system. Another huge risk, financial risk, is the lack of flexibility that we are having. We're starting to have, in the last 10 years, the legislature has put a lot of restrictions, more restrictions on how we spend our funds, and that is requiring us to spend the same dollar less efficiently 10 years later. An example of that would be the K-3 class size. We are restricted to having 17 students in kindergarten, 16 students in first grade, and 18 students in second and third grade starting next year. And that not having even numbers is very difficult to manage, and it's leading us to be very restrictive in how we can enroll students. It's led to the capping of schools, highly inefficient for transportation, and we need more flexibility if we're going to help save taxpayer dollars. And I think that's a huge strain and risk to the school system. So we need our flexibility back so that we can be much wiser about how we spend public dollars. And I think another huge liability is something I mentioned early on in this restructuring of the pension system at the state level. In essence, the state was concerned about the risk of future pensions coming from educators in our state, and they didn't really fix the system. What they did is shifted it down in a ill-conceived pension spiking scheme that now is just shifting all that burden to the local LEAs, and it's leaving us at some significant financial risk. And I think that is really an attack on the financial solvency of schools that I think needs to be fixed. It needs to get greater attention from our legislators. We don't talk about it enough, I think, because it's not a logical system, and it's been very unfair and unfairly implemented. So we are I think that's something to keep an eye on. We are, I think, LEAs across the state are challenging it, and and they rightfully should, because it's not fair to educators who spent their lifetime and careers working to improve our students' education and working hard on behalf of our kids.
Right. So someone wants you to expand a little bit on your conversation about high poverty schools. What's a high poverty school? How many does Wake Kent have? Are we going up or down in the number of schools?
We have seen an increase in higher poverty schools given our housing patterns. And so we are working with Research Triangle Institute to develop a plan so that we can address this increase in stratification in our housing, and also a lot of parents who are leaving, who will not enroll their student in a school that they see is higher poverty and may go to a charter or a voucher or leave the public school system. So we've got, and I'm sorry I don't have the numbers, I don't want to misstate them, but I can link them to your presentation later. But we're looking to see how we can keep our elementary schools within 15 or 20 points of our county average, and our high schools 10 to 15 points within our county average. So how can we be intentional about our enrollment policies? How can we be intentional about the programs that we put in the school so we can attract families to that school? And we're beginning, one example we just talked about in our October meeting was before and after school care. I think we need to look for competitive advantages and things we can do to incentivize parents to come to our schools. And one barrier has been childcare. So we're looking at how can we have childcare be an incentive to have parents choose our public schools, both by offering high quality before school care and after school care. For too many decades, we've structured our public schools around families that might have a stay-at-home parent as one of the at home, and that's just not that's no longer the case. We've got single parents, we've got two parent working families, and so we should be expanding the quality and the offerings of before and after school care in order to help parents get a great education for their child, but also get great child care for those business hours where they need to be at work.
And Christine, you probably remember that A.B. Combs Magnet Elementary School started as a before and after school program. Right. That's they were a magnet after magnet. That's the first magnet emphasis they had when the school was very, very close to closing because of low enrollment. And when they implemented the after school program, it shot right up. It doubled its enrollment in the first year of offering that as a magnet. Of course, now it's an outstanding leadership magnet, but I think that's a really good to see that you're revisiting some things that were kind of in need, and then maybe were less in need, and now they're back as a high priority. Another quick question here is, folks want to know, what is Wake County doing about pre-K? Is Wake County actively involved in providing pre-K programs, or are you partnering with organizations that have pre-K programs?
And pre-K is another example of something that we need to partner with our community, with our after and before school care. We've got great partnerships with the YMCA with Boys and Girls Clubs and other community agencies to provide that care. And with pre-K, we're working with Smart Start, as well as expanding the pre-K that we have in our 120 some elementary schools. We are charged with finding students who are developmentally delayed and providing that the pre-K services to students who are in need of pre-K so that they can get ready in kindergarten. But we're also, I think, trying to work to expand our early learning throughout the district. And I think it's been a great emphasis and some great partnerships with community agencies, and something that we need to look at so that we can, again, be the center for education for our kids. And we've seen that pre-K is an excellent investment for public dollars, because every dollar in pre-K has a wonderful multiplier effect, and students being successful, families being successful, and it's something that has staying power. So we certainly are interested in expanding early learning through Wake County schools.
And Christine, I can share that 30 years ago, when I was doing my doctoral work, the ability to predict a child's success was pretty strong when they entered kindergarten. And it's really depressing, discouraging to see that now, 30 years later, we still know that when a child enters kindergarten, how prepared they are at that very beginning of public education is still a predictor of their long-term success. So that is really a challenge. I really hope that not just Wake County, but every school system and the state as a whole will continue to work on. And I appreciate that Wake County is taking a really strong move in this area. Another quick question that folks want to know is, when you look at the pre-K programs in the community, are your staff interacting with their staff in terms of shared strategies, instructional, tools and techniques? And are you having any opportunity for good dialogue between what's being offered in the programs and for pre-K and then what is expected when those kids enter kindergarten? Is your partnership involving that kind of interaction?
I believe so. I know that we are working hard with Smart Start and other community agencies, both in throughout the county. And I think I would love to have Wake County again have Project Enlightenment as a leader in that early learning space. We have a long history since in Project Enlightenment for some great programs that were out in the community and did lots of screenings, but also support the parents in those early years that I think I would love for us to renew. Project Enlightenment is having its 50th anniversary, I think, in November. So that's something that we should watch for here in our community.
Do you see in the future, as Wake County keeps working in this area, do you see where Wake County public school system itself would have more and more pre-K programs inside of the elementary school program? Do you think that's a trend that's going to happen?
I think that is part of our strategic plan, is to expand that. We've been building schools to have pre-K spaces in them, pre-K both outdoor and indoor spaces. I think it's another place where the K-3 class size has strained us. So I would love for us to have some relief in that so that we can use our space in our schools more wisely. But we've talked about even exploring a early learning center in addition to the Project Enlightenment. I would love for us to do more work in that area. Absolutely.
So the last question here is kind of more of a statement and your reaction to that. So people talk about public education as a common good. What does that mean to Christine Kushner, who has spent most of her adult life volunteering in schools and over 10 years serving on the school board? What does that concept, public education as a common, public good, what does that mean to you?
Well, I'm a fierce advocate for public education for exactly that reason, that I think public education is inclusive. It supports and engages all children and all families. I think there's a place for every family in a public school. We offer such a variety of options for families because that's what our community asks of us. And I think our schools continue to be an economic engine for our community. We have great universities and great early learning centers, but our K-12 public school system is still foremost on the minds. When businesses locate here, they don't ask about tax rates, they ask how strong are your public schools. And I think Wake County is fortunate to have a very strong public school system that continues to attract businesses and families to us. Our core belief as part of our strategic plan is that well-supported, highly effective, and dedicated principals, teachers, and staff are essential to the success of all students. And we take that as a core value very seriously, because I think what we feel as our mission is to meet the needs and expectations of every student, because what we are doing is accessing for them a public education that's going to prepare them for their life, what they do after graduation. That's foremost in our minds, and that's what we are working hard to have as our mission and our culture for every employee of the Wake County Public School System. And for me, as a daughter of immigrants, my public school opened me up to my community. That's one of the things I talk about when I talk about my commitment to public education. It helped me become fully engaged as a citizen of this nation. And I think that is the foundational duty of public schools. And it's much more needed now in the 21st century as it ever has been. So the public school is, to me, the foundation of who we are going to be as a democracy in the future. So I get up every morning and do this job and this work, and it's an honor to represent District 6 on the Wake County Board of Education and to be here with you, Dr. Brannon, and talk about public schools. I could do this all night.
Well, me too, and we're running out of time, but I do want to say that I really appreciate your comments. I appreciate your life of service, Christine. Anyone who knows you admires you and respects you so much because of your true passion and your true belief in the common good. Public education from John Adams throughout our founding fathers all the way to now has always said that it is for the best for all children. I love John Adams's, I can't say his quote exactly, but he pretty much said that if we're going to be a democratic, free society, then we need to have a free public education system accessible to all children, regardless of their walks of life, their backgrounds, their zip code, as we like to say, that we have to provide that. That is a cornerstone of a strong democracy, when you can have free thinkers and strong thinkers and folks who are prepared to make decisions in life. And so I always love that. And I think sometimes we forget as a public that, we sometimes think about choices for our own children as if they have no impact on choices for all children. And so I think that's one of the concepts of public good that we really have to re-examine. And so my last question, I'll give you, this is it. This is your last chance you get to say this. So what can parents and the community do to make sure that our public schools are strong, are integrated, are diverse? What responsibility do we have, and what advice can you give us as citizens, as parents, as voters, taxpayers, and as community?
I think parents and our community members should support our public schools, send our children to our public schools. I think I love quoting Carl Sandburg, who said the ugliest word in the English language is exclusive. And what I love about our public schools is that they are inclusive, not only of all children, but all families, regardless of background, and all volunteers and community members. They serve, our public schools don't only serve parents and families and students, they serve the community. They serve the 70% who don't have school-age children, because they are foundational to our community. So I think that, to me, is the true common good that public schools provide. They are for everybody. And we say for every child each day is our mantra at Wake County Public School System. And that we mean that, because every child deserves that public education that's going to help them out in the world when they're graduate. And if that's the vision we have, that's the mission we have, and our community expects no less from us.
We're going to end there because that's perfectly said and beautifully said. I would just encourage everybody that's listening tonight to go to our website. We have a lot of very important information there on all of these issues around privatization and segregation of our schools. We have a lot of information there that deals with the underfunding of our schools and the threats to our once vibrant public education system that we used to have in North Carolina, that was a beacon to all states in the nation, now is currently struggling with these efforts of privatization, struggling with segregation of our schools, struggling with underfunding. A lot of information for people to come and learn on your own and decide how you can be a strong public education advocate and a strong public education voter. So go to, you know the drill, go to our website, join our newsletter, like us on Facebook, join us on Twitter, because we really want our citizens to know what's going on in our public schools, what's going on at the General Assembly that impacts our schools, and we invite you to be a part of this conversation. And thank you, Christine, again, and thank you to our listeners. This will be recorded and it will be posted on our website. And Christine, I want you to come back and join us another evening to listen in, because we are going to have another webinar that's going to focus with Roxy Cash and Heather Scott, who are on your school board, and talk with some parents in northern Wake County, northern East Wake County, about the impact regionally within our county that's happening in Wake County, and the impact of the number of charters that have, as you've said, have kind of located themselves in East Wake, Northeast Wake, and what impact that's having on the school systems in Wake County. So we'll be coming back with that in a couple of weeks, and I hope you'll join us. And to everyone else,
that's going to be an important conversation. Thank you, Public Schools First North Carolina, for the excellent information you put out for parents and for voters. I think it's critical time. And thank you, Yvonne, and to your staff for the great work. Thank you for the opportunity and for having my colleagues continue the conversation.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. Okay, good night, everybody. Thank you, Christine.
Thanks very much. Good night.
Good night. There you go. Bye-bye.